Hello, Assalamu alaikum learners of English literature. My today's topic is Function of Poetry by Matthew Arnold. We know Matthew Arnold is a great literary giant of Victorian period, and in the study of poetry, he has elaborately pointed out the nature function of great poetry. While describing the nature function of great poetry, he has also referred the great future of poetry. According to Matthew Arnold, that in future people will rest upon poetry because religious beliefs at the time had already broken down. So let's see what Matthew Arnold has said about the function of best poetry. So first, Matthew Arnold says that poetry would be set for high destiny. As Matthew Arnold knew that at that time or other kind of arts, in fact philosophy, religion and history, they had lost their values and people came to poetry. So he has pointed out some fundamental features of best poetry, because otherwise people won't accept poetry. So for this reason, he has set for high destiny of poetry. Because high destiny of poetry means the great future of poetry. Then Matthew Arnold says about the interpretation of life. And yes, Matthew Arnold has said that in poetry there would be the explanation of life, and we know that interpretation of life means explanation of life. So in poetry the poets would reflect human lives, and from poetry people can see how life actually in reality. So undoubtedly poetry would be the interpretation of life according to Matthew Arnold. Then Matthew Arnold says about poetic truth and poetic beauty. These two terms are related to interpretation of life. So poetic truth means a poet's freedom to depict morality according to his own. As we know that a poet has the power or has the freedom to use imagination as well as reality in his writing, and thus he can focus actual morality. Here lies the greatness of a poet. As well as a poet would focus also on poetic beauty, and poetic beauty means depicting, actually using different literary devices like rhyme, meter and diction in poetry, so that it would be very focusing and people can be attracted to read poetry. So these two terms, poetic truth and poetic beauty, thus Matthew Arnold has explained. Then Matthew Arnold says about poetry would be classic in nature. Yes, poetry only of high standard can last in the world, otherwise the poetry of low or below standard can last longer, and it can sustain, can console, can entertain as well as form people. So for that reason Matthew Arnold says about the classic standard of poetry. And to describe classic standard of poetry, Matthew Arnold actually here mentioned the great authors like Homer, Dante, Shakespeare and Milton. He has cited a quotation from one of the writings of William Shakespeare. He says that life is a walking shadow, as well as he told it is a tale told by an idiot full of fire and sound signifying nothing. So these kind of poetry only actually can actually reform human life and also disburse morality. So Matthew Arnold has priorities on actually classic poetry. Then Matthew Arnold described that there would be no difference between poetry and morality. Yes, there would be no demarcation between poetry and morality, but to write poetry, Matthew Arnold also emphasized on highlighting morality, but it's not necessarily that a poet would write poetry on morality only. According to Matthew Arnold, morality has been described in different way. According to him, morality means actually giving direction how to survive, how to live on the world, facing all the problems of life. This is morality actually according to Matthew Arnold, and a poet would certainly focus these ideals of morality according to Matthew Arnold, and that kind of poetry only would actually can motivate people, console people and sustain people as well as reform people. Then Matthew Arnold says about the absence of emotion and passion. And Matthew Arnold was quite opposite or against the romantic ideals of poetry. Basically, the romantic poets, we know, their priorities on emotion and feeling. But Matthew Arnold has said that, in fact, he was quite opposite to those ideals, because emotion and passion are nothing to do with in reality. So, in fact, we know that Matthew Arnold was a poet of Victorian age, and Victorian age was an age of scientific revolution as well as industrial revolution. For that, people got materialistic. They deviated from the path of religion and morality. And Matthew Arnold's focus was to highlight morality, so that he can restore the morality of the Victorian people. And that was the purpose of Matthew Arnold. And criticism of Arnold's view of poetry is, no doubt, Matthew Arnold has given his own definition or own directions regarding poetry, but his definition of the characteristics of poetry has been criticized also, because great Professor Sainsbury has criticized harshly Matthew Arnold, because Matthew Arnold excluded emotion and passion from poetry. That's quite quite exceptional. According to Sainsbury, there is not that Matthew Arnold only had written poetry focusing on high seriousness and criticism of life, but the other poets of the other ages, they also focused high seriousness and noble applications of life, of poetry. So, if Matthew Arnold, according to Matthew Arnold, that if emotion and passion are excluded from poetry, then it would be just abstract and harsh, and it would be one-sided poetry. So thus Matthew Arnold was also criticized. But after all, Matthew Arnold has given his own directions and suggestions regarding poetry. That is his greatness. Thank you, learners, for being with me.